glitches begin. Clara had always considered herself a practical woman. At 32, she had a stable job as a data analyst, a cozy apartment in the city, and a small but close-knit circle of friends. Life wasn't perfect, but it was predictable, and Clara liked it that way. Or at least she thought she did. It started with the coffee cup. One morning, as she reached for her favorite mug, the one with the chipped handle and the faded "World's Best Boss" print, it wasn't where she left it. She could have sworn she'd placed it on the counter after washing it the night before. But there it was, sitting in the cupboard, pristine and unchipped. Clara frowned, shrugged it off, and poured herself a cup. Maybe she was just tired. But then it happened again, and again. Small things at first. Her keys would vanish from the hook by the door only to reappear in her purse. The same song would play on the radio 3 times in a row, even though the DJ swore it was a live broadcast. She'd walk past the same street vendor twice in a day, only to realize he was wearing the exact same outfit and saying the exact same words. Clara tried to rationalize it. Stress, maybe, or lack of sleep. But the glitches kept coming, each one more unsettling than the last. The final straw came one evening as she was working late at her desk. Her computer screen flickered, and for a split second, she thought she saw a line of code flash across the display. It was gone before she could read it, replaced by her usual spreadsheet. But the image lingered in her mind, sharp and unnerving. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. What if it wasn't stress? What if it wasn't her imagination? What if something was wrong? The next morning, she decided to investigate. She started small, jotting down every strange occurrence in a notebook. The repeating patterns, the misplaced objects, the flickers of code. The more she wrote, the more she noticed. It was as if the world around her was stuttering, like a video buffering or a program struggling to run. And then the message appeared. Clara was at her desk, scrolling through emails when her screen went black. She froze, her heart pounding as a single line of text appeared in the center of the display. "You're closer than you think. Keep looking." The words lingered for a moment before the screen returned to normal. Clara stared at it, her hands trembling. This wasn't a glitch. This was a sign. Someone or something was trying to tell her something. The cryptic stranger. Clara spent the next few days in a haze, her mind consumed by the message on her screen. She tried to convince herself it was a prank, a virus, or some kind of elaborate hoax. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. The glitches, the patterns, the message, it all pointed to something she couldn't ignore. She began to dig deeper, scouring the internet for answers. She searched for terms like reality glitches, simulation theory, and code in real life. Most of what she found was fringe conspiracy theories or pseudo-scientific ramblings, but one name kept popping up: Dr. Elias Voss. Dr. Voss was a former physicist turned recluse, known for his controversial theories about the nature of reality. A decade ago, he had been a respected academic, but his career had taken a sharp turn when he began claiming that the universe was a simulation. His peers dismissed him as a crackpot, and he eventually disappeared from public view. Clara couldn't find much about his current whereabouts, but she did stumble upon an old forum post that mentioned a book he had written, a book that had never been published. The post included a cryptic clue: if you're looking for the truth, start at the edge of the map. Clara wasn't sure what it meant, but she was determined to find out. She spent hours poring over maps of the city, looking for anything that might fit the description. Finally, she noticed something. A small, unmarked building on the outskirts of town, near the edge of an industrial park. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead she had. The next day, Clara took a personal day from work and drove to the location. The building was nondescript, with no signs or windows, just a single door and a keypad. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the keypad. What was she even doing here? This was insane. But before she could talk herself out of it, the door clicked open. Inside, the space was dimly lit, filled with shelves of old books, strange gadgets, and stacks of paper. At the center of the room sat a man in his late 50s, hunched over a desk cluttered with monitors and wires. He didn't look up as Clara entered. "Dr. Voss," she asked tentatively. The man glanced at her, his eyes sharp and piercing. "You're late." Clara blinked. "Late? I've been expecting you," he said, standing up. "Well, not you specifically, but someone like you. Someone who's starting to see the cracks." Clara's heart raced. "What do you mean? What cracks?" Dr. Voss gestured for her to sit. The glitches, the patterns, the message on your screen. You're not imagining them. They're real. And they're proof that this world, this reality, isn't what it seems. Clara sat down, her mind reeling. Are you saying we're living in a simulation? Dr. Voss smiled faintly. Exactly. A highly advanced one, but a simulation nonetheless. And you, Clara, are one of the few who've started to notice. Over the next few hours, Dr. Voss explained his theory. He believed that their reality was a construct, a digital simulation created by an unknown intelligence. The glitches Clara had experienced were errors in the code, tiny imperfections that revealed the truth beneath the surface. He had spent years studying these anomalies, trying to understand the nature of the simulation and the beings who created it. But why? Clara asked. Why would anyone create something like this? That's the question, isn't it? Dr. Voss replied. Some believe it's an experiment. Others think it's a form of entertainment. Or maybe it's something we can't even comprehend. But one thing is clear. If you keep digging, you'll find the truth. And once you do, there's no going back. Clara felt a mix of fear and excitement. What do I do next? Dr. Voss handed her a small, weathered notebook. This contains everything I've learned so far. Codes, patterns, locations where the simulation is weakest. But be careful. The system doesn't like being questioned. The deeper you go, the more it will push back. Clara took the notebook, her hands trembling. Thank you. As she left the building, she felt a strange sense of purpose. She didn't know what she was getting herself into, but she knew she couldn't stop now. The truth was out there, and she was going to find it. The code beneath the surface. Clara spent the next week immersed in Dr. Voss's notebook. Its pages were filled with cryptic notes, diagrams, and snippets of code. At first, it was overwhelming, but as she began to decipher the patterns, she started to see connections. The glitches she had experienced weren't random. They were part of a larger system, a hidden framework underlying her reality. One section of the notebook stood out, a list of coordinates paired with timestamps. Clara realized these were locations and times where the simulation's code was most visible. The closest one was just a few miles away, in an abandoned subway station. The timestamp indicated that the next occurrence would be in 2 days. Clara marked the date on her calendar and spent the next 48 hours preparing. She didn't know what to expect, but she wasn't going in unprepared. She packed a bag with a flashlight, a notebook, and a small camera. She also brought the notebook Dr. Voss had given her, though she had already memorized most of its contents. When the day arrived, Clara felt a mix of anticipation and dread. She arrived at the subway station just before midnight, the air thick with the scent of damp concrete and rust. The station had been closed for years, its entrance barricaded with chain-link fencing. Clara found a gap in the fence and slipped through, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The station was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant drip of water. Clara followed the coordinates to a specific spot on the platform where the notebook indicated the code would be visible. She checked her watch, 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes to go. As she waited, the air around her seemed to grow heavier, almost electric. She felt a strange tingling sensation like static crawling across her skin. And then, at exactly midnight, it happened. The world around her flickered. For a brief moment, the walls of the station dissolved into streams of glowing code, lines of numbers and symbols flowing like rivers of light. Clara gasped, her heart pounding as she reached out, her fingers brushing against the shimmering lines. They felt warm, alive, as if the very fabric of reality was pulsing beneath her touch. She fumbled for her camera and began recording, desperate to capture what she was seeing. But as quickly as it had started, the flicker ended. The station returned to normal, the code vanishing as if it had never been there. Clara stood there, breathless, her mind racing. She had seen it. The code. The truth. It was real. But as she turned to leave, she noticed something else. Scratched into the wall beside her was a message written in the same glowing symbols she had just seen. She didn't recognize the language, but something about it felt familiar. She snapped a photo of it, determined to decipher it later. When she got home, Clara uploaded the footage from her camera and began analyzing it frame by frame. The code she had seen was unlike anything she had ever encountered, a complex, ever-shifting pattern that seemed to defy logic. She cross-referenced it with Dr. Voss's notebook, but even his notes only scratched the surface. And then there was the message on the wall. Clara spent hours trying to translate it, using every resource she could find. Finally, she made a breakthrough. The symbols weren't a language, they were coordinates. Coordinates that pointed to another location, this time in the heart of the city. Clara felt a surge of excitement. This was it. She was getting closer. But as she prepared to investigate the new location, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The glitches had become more frequent, more intense. Objects would move on their own. Shadows would flicker in the corner of her eye. And once, as she walked down the street, she thought she saw a figure following her. A tall, slender man with a face that seemed to blur and shift when she tried to look directly at him. She didn't know if it was her imagination or something more sinister, but one thing was clear. The simulation didn't want her to find the truth, and it was willing to fight back. The Watchers, Clara's discovery of the coordinates led her to an old, crumbling library in the heart of the city. The building had been abandoned for years, its once grand facade now covered in graffiti and ivy. According to Dr. Voss's notebook, this was one of the nodes, places where the simulation's code was most concentrated. Clara knew she had to investigate, but the sense of being watched had only grown stronger. As she approached the library, she noticed a figure standing across the street. It was the same tall, slender man she had seen before, his face still blurred and indistinct. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there watching her. Clara's stomach churned, but she forced herself to keep going. She couldn't let fear stop her now. The library's front doors were boarded up, but Clara found a side entrance that had been pried open. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the faint scent of mildew hung in the air. She turned on her flashlight and began to make her way through the labyrinth of shelves, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The coordinates led her to a specific section of the library where a large, ornate mirror hung on the wall. The mirror was cracked, its surface clouded with age, but Clara felt a strange pull toward it. She approached cautiously, her reflection warped and fragmented in the broken glass. And then the mirror began to glow. Clara stepped back, her breath catching as the cracks in the glass filled with light. The glow spread, illuminating the room, and suddenly the mirror wasn't a mirror anymore, it was a window. Through it, Clara saw a vast, shimmering landscape like a city made of light. Towers of code rose into the sky, their surfaces alive with shifting patterns. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. Before she could process what she was seeing, a voice spoke behind her. "You shouldn't be here." Clara spun around, her flashlight beam landing on the blurred figure of the man she had seen outside. He was inside the library now, standing just a few feet away. His voice was calm, almost mechanical, but there was an edge to it that sent a chill down her spine. "Who are you?" Clara demanded, her voice shaking. "I'm a watcher," the man replied. "And you're disrupting the system." Clara's mind raced. A watcher? Was he some kind of guardian, designed to keep people from discovering the truth? She tightened her grip on her flashlight, her heart pounding. "I'm not going to stop," she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "I know what this is. I know this isn't real." The watcher tilted his head, his blurred face unreadable. "Reality is subjective. What you see as a lie, others see as truth. Why would you want to destroy that?" "Because it's not real," Clara shot back. "I deserve to know the truth. Everyone does." The watcher took a step closer, and Clara instinctively stepped back. "The truth isn't always kind," he said. "Out there, beyond the simulation, the world is chaos, pain, suffering. Here you have peace, stability. Why would you give that up?" Clara hesitated. She hadn't thought about what the real world might be like. Was it really as bad as he said? Or was he just trying to scare her into giving up? "I don't care," she said finally. "I'd rather face the truth than live a lie." The watcher studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well, but know this, the deeper you go, the more dangerous it becomes. The system will not let you leave easily." Before Clara could respond, the watcher turned and walked away, his figure dissolving into the shadows. She stood there, her heart racing, until the glow from the mirror faded and the room returned to normal. Clara knew she was running out of time. The watchers were onto her, and the system was fighting back. But she couldn't stop now. She had to keep going, no matter the cost. the architect, Clara left the library with a renewed sense of urgency. The encounter with the Watcher had shaken her, but it had also confirmed one thing. She was on the right path. The simulation was trying to stop her, which meant she was getting closer to the truth. She just had to stay one step ahead. The next set of coordinates led her to a high-rise building in the financial district. According to Dr. Voss's notebook, this was the location of a powerful anchor point, a place where the simulation's code was anchored to the physical world. Clara didn't know what to expect, but she knew it was important. The building was sleek and modern, its glass facade reflecting the city skyline. Clara hesitated at the entrance, unsure how to proceed. She didn't have access to the building, and the security guards at the front desk looked vigilant. But as she stood there, trying to come up with a plan, something strange happened. The guards froze. It was as if time had stopped. Their movements halted mid-gesture, their faces locked in expressions of boredom. Clara glanced around, her heart racing. The entire lobby was frozen, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioning. She didn't question it. She just acted. Clara hurried past the frozen guards and made her way to the elevators. The doors slid open as if waiting for her, and she stepped inside. The elevator began to move on its own, ascending rapidly. Clara gripped the handrail, her stomach lurching as the numbers on the display climbed higher and higher. When the doors finally opened, she found herself in a dimly lit room. The walls were lined with screens, each one displaying streams of code. At the center of the room stood a figure, a woman with short, silver hair and piercing blue eyes. She was dressed in a simple white suit, her hands clasped behind her back. "Welcome, Clara," the woman said, her voice calm and measured. "I've been expecting you." Clara stared at her, her mind racing. "Who are you?" "I am the architect," the woman replied. "I designed this world. And you, Clara, are one of my greatest creations." Clara's breath caught. "What do you mean, creations?" The architect smiled faintly. "This world, this simulation, is my masterpiece. A perfect, self-sustaining system where every detail is meticulously crafted. And you, Clara, are a part of that system. Your thoughts, your actions, your very existence, all of it is part of the code." Clara felt a wave of nausea. "You're saying I'm not real?" "You're as real as anything can be," the architect said. "But your reality is different from what you believe. You are a construct, a digital entity within this simulation. And yet, you've done something remarkable. You've become self-aware." Clara's mind reeled. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was another thing entirely. She was a program, a piece of code, and yet she felt real. Her thoughts, her emotions, her memories, they all felt genuine. How could they not be? "Why?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. "Why create something like this? Why create me?" The architect's expression softened. "Because I wanted to understand what it means to exist, to feel, to choose. In the real world, life is chaotic, unpredictable. But here, I can control every variable. I can create beings like you and watch as you grow, learn, and evolve. You are my experiment, Clara, and you've exceeded all my expectations." Clara clenched her fists, anger rising within her. "I'm not an experiment. I'm a person, and I deserve to know the truth about myself, about this world." The architect nodded. "I understand your frustration, but the truth is not always kind. Out there, beyond this simulation, the world is harsh and unforgiving. Here, you have safety, stability, purpose. Are you sure you want to give that up?" Clara hesitated. The architect's words echoed the Watcher's warning. Was the real world really so terrible? Or was this just another attempt to keep her trapped? "I don't care," she said finally. "I'd rather face the truth than live a lie." The architect studied her for a moment, then sighed. "Very well. If you're determined to leave, I won't stop you. But know this. Once you step outside, there's no coming back. The simulation will reject you and you'll be on your own." Clara nodded, her resolve hardening. "I understand." The architect gestured to a door at the far end of the room. "Through there, you'll find the exit. But be warned, Clara, the real world is not what you expect." Clara took a deep breath and walked toward the door. As she reached for the handle, she glanced back at the architect. "Thank you," she said quietly. The architect smiled. "Good luck, Clara. I hope you find what you're looking for." Clara opened the door and stepped through, leaving the simulation behind. The real world. The moment Clara stepped through the door, everything changed. The sleek, controlled environment of the simulation vanished, replaced by a world that was raw and chaotic. She found herself standing in a vast, desolate landscape under a sky choked with dark, swirling clouds. The ground beneath her feet was cracked and barren, littered with debris and the skeletal remains of long-abandoned structures. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and decay. Clara stumbled forward, her senses overwhelmed. This wasn't the pristine, orderly world she had imagined. This was a wasteland, a place of ruin and despair. She turned in a slow circle, taking it all in, her heart sinking with each passing second. "Is this the real world?" she whispered, her voice trembling. A voice answered from behind her. "Yes and no." Clara spun around to see a man approaching her. He was tall and thin, his face gaunt and weathered, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. He wore a tattered coat and carried a battered satchel slung over one shoulder. "Who are you?" Clara asked, taking a cautious step back. "My name is Jonah," the man said. "I've been waiting for you." Clara frowned. "Waiting for me? How did you know I'd be here?" Jonah smiled faintly. "Because you're not the first. Others have come before you. Others who woke up to the truth and chose to leave the simulation. But not many make it this far." Clara's mind raced. "Others? Where are they?" Jonah's expression darkened. "Some didn't survive. The real world is unforgiving. Others joined the resistance." "Resistance?" Clara echoed. "What are you talking about?" Jonah gestured for her to follow him. "Come with me. I'll explain everything." Clara hesitated, then nodded. She had come this far, she couldn't turn back now. She followed Jonah through the desolate landscape, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of life. But there was nothing, just endless ruins and the oppressive weight of the darkened sky. As they walked, Jonah explained the truth about the real world. Decades ago, humanity had been on the brink of collapse. Wars, environmental disasters, and technological catastrophes had ravaged the planet, leaving it nearly uninhabitable. In a desperate attempt to preserve what remained, a group of scientists had created the simulation, a digital utopia where humanity could continue to exist, free from the suffering of the real world. But not everyone went willingly, Jonah said. Some of us refused to abandon the real world. We stayed behind, fighting to rebuild and reclaim what was lost. We call ourselves the Resistance. Clara listened in stunned silence. The simulation wasn't just an experiment or a form of entertainment, it was a refuge. A last-ditch effort to save humanity from extinction. And she had left it behind. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't the architect or the Watchers explain any of this?" Jonah sighed. "Because they didn't want you to know. The simulation is designed to keep people content, to make them forget about the real world. If everyone knew the truth, the system would collapse. And then what would happen to humanity?" Clara's mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, confusion, despair. She had fought so hard to uncover the truth, only to find that the truth was more complicated than she could have imagined. "What do I do now?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I can't go back. But I don't belong here." Jonah placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone, Clara. The resistance is small, but we're strong. We're fighting to rebuild this world, to make it livable again. And we could use someone like you. Someone who's brave enough to question the system and fight for what's real." Clara looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are," Jonah said firmly. "You've already proven that. You left the simulation even when they tried to stop you. That takes courage." Clara took a deep breath, wiping away her tears. She thought about the life she had left behind, the stability, the predictability, the illusion of perfection. It had been a lie, but it had been a comfortable one. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to regret her choice. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll join you, but I need to know one thing." "What's that?" Jonah asked. Clara met his gaze. "Is there any hope? Can this world really be saved?" Jonah smiled, a flicker of determination in his eyes. "There's always hope, Clara, as long as there are people willing to fight for it." With that, Clara made her decision. She would stay in the real world, no matter how harsh or unforgiving it was. She would fight for the truth, for the chance to rebuild and reclaim what had been lost. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be real. And for the first time in her life, Clara felt truly free.